Marine farmers are being urged to limit the movement of boats and equipment after the discovery of a parasite that has the potential to devastate New Zealand's famous multi-million-dollar oyster fishery. Bonamia austriae has turned up at 2 oyster farms in Stewart Island, and fishery officials are trying to stop its spread across Fovo Strait to wild oyster fisheries. An aquaculture manager at Nelson Research Institute says the parasite can quickly take hold, but it's not yet clear how or why it occurs. Here's our Nelson reporter, Tracy Neal.
The Ministry for Primary Industry says the strain of parasite first appeared in flat oysters in the Marlborough Sounds 2 years ago, but this is the first time it's been found in flat oysters in another area. Dr. Sarah Adams of the Cawthron Institute says there are 3 species of oyster grown in New Zealand.
The Bluff oyster, and that occurs throughout New Zealand, so it's got different names. It's also known as the flat oyster, or the Elson oyster. We've got Pacific oysters, and that's the main one that's farmed in New Zealand. And then we also have the rock oyster, and that was the early aquaculture industry was actually based on that species.
Dr. Adams says the parasite begins in the oyster's blood cells and develops into a lethal disease, but it's not known how it gets into oyster farms.
We know from some overseas research about how it can survive at different temperatures and how different aged oysters are affected, but that's all based on a different oyster species. It's not with our species.
MPI says the parasite was found after routine surveillance set up after the outbreak in Marlborough. Biosecurity Manager Brendan Gould says the Ministry has taken immediate steps to try and stop its spread.
We have reissued the controlled area notice that we have around Marlborough, and we've now included Stewart Island in that. And we've also extended within Stewart Island that controlled area to include the movement of equipment and vessels associated with those farms.
Mr. Gould says it's a naturally occurring parasite which is easily spread through ocean currents and on vessels. Graham Wright of the Bluff Oyster Management Company says it's now a waiting game to see if it will spread to their wild fishery.
It made it from overseas to Melbourne, and it's made it from Melbourne to Stewart Island. And, literally the Big Glory Bay, the mouth of that is, literally, as the crow flies, probably less than a mile or 2 miles from where there's commercial oyster beds. The risk of it spreading, has to be extremely high.
Mr.
Gould says farmers have reacted quickly to try and stop the spread.
Those affected down south and in Marlborough have been, really helpful. They recognise the impact that this will have on them and those, operating around them. So they've been really, proactive in managing the risks themselves as well, and they're working closely with us.
Sarah Adams from the Cawthron says the flat oyster industry is still in its infancy compared with other aquaculture species, but there are high hopes for it. She says while it's a serious situation, overseas research suggests selective breeding can help in the war against this invader.
You can see from the overseas experience that they're starting to get, with their selective breeding, they've demonstrated that they can get disease resilience to this parasite.
But Graham Wright says oysters are tricky creatures and building tolerance in farmed oysters could leave wild fisheries vulnerable.
It is New Zealand's most iconic seafood, I would suggest. It is New Zealand's oldest commercial fishery. It's been, harvested since the days of sailing cutters in 1865. It's worth some effort to save. And how will Bonamia austriae affect it? Who knows? Time will tell.
The Bluff flat oyster fishery is currently valued at $22 million a year, and it's seen as a key driver behind reaching $1 billion worth of aquaculture industry sales by 2025. For Checkpoint, Tracy Neal.